In Washington, a fight is brewing over raising the federal debt ceiling. The national debt now stands at $31.4 trillion, with the U.S. expected to hit its borrowing limit on Thursday. But the Treasury Secretary has announced steps to buy a few more months. For the latest, let's bring in NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Tsirkin. Julie, good morning to you. Talk to us about those steps being taken so that the U.S. can keep paying its bills. What's the Treasury Department planning to do?
Yeah, good morning, Lindsay and Joe. Look, Janet Yellen said that they're going to take, quote, extraordinary measures to keep the government open past this Thursday deadline, which is tomorrow. And some of those steps basically include pausing payments to the retirement accounts of federal employees. The government, the Treasury Department says that this is something they've used before, in fact, 16 times since about the 1980s. And it's something they say that these federal employees won't feel, because in theory, when the government is able to lift the debt ceiling, when Congress is able to come together and hopefully coalesce around the idea sometime before mid-June, per Janet Yellen, the idea is that these federal employees won't feel those extraordinary measures being taken. But what will happen is that this will buy some time for those negotiations to happen, which are currently at a stalemate in Congress.
So Congress has raised the debt ceiling dozens of times since 1960, Julie. With Democrats and Republicans looking to find some common ground, what are some of the challenges they can expect to face over the next several months?
Yeah, look, this happens every few years. And in fact, even a stalemate like this one has happened before. More similarly, in 2011, when President Obama inherited a new Republican House and they wanted to put future spending caps in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. That's exactly the conversation we're having now. And so one of the things that Kevin McCarthy, who's now Speaker, assured, particularly to those deficit hawks in his party who handed him the gavel, is that he would fight for those future spending cuts at the same time that they would vote to lift the debt ceiling. That's something the White House has called an absolute non-starter. But in any case, Kevin McCarthy is calling for those negotiations to begin in earnest now. Take a listen to what he said yesterday.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to sit down with all the leaders, especially with the president, and start having discussion. I think it's a sign of arrogance if you would say he wouldn't even discuss it. Who wants to put the nation in some type of threat at the last minute of debt ceiling? Nobody wants to do that. That's why we're asking, let's change our behavior now. Let's sit down.
So the White House and Democrats, even the Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, are saying that nothing but a clean debt ceiling raise is a non-starter. If they want to negotiate future spending cuts aside from that, that's possibly an opening there. But it's really hard to imagine how all sides are going to come together around this, because even the threat of the debt ceiling not being raised, even a month or two before, will send markets spiraling and will potentially cost thousands of jobs. And if that debt ceiling is not raised for the first time in history, by the way, that could be really detrimental, including for the U.S.'s future borrowing capabilities, even raising interest payments and doing the opposite of what these Republicans are trying to accomplish by lowering the deficit.
All right, Julie, before we let you go, I want to ask you about embattled New York Congressman George Santos. He now has committee assignments, all the while facing calls for him to resign for lying about his background. What can you tell us about his new roles?
Yeah, George Santos was seated on two committees. That was decided behind closed doors by the steering committee, the Republicans who control this process. Yesterday, they seated him on the Science Committee and on the Small Business Committee. These are more lower level committees. They don't have any security clearances or anything to that effect. McCarthy, the speaker, said that he would not put Santos on so-called A-level committees. That includes the Intelligence Committee, Judiciary, some of those committees that have more oversight and require security clearances. Now, while Santos is under these investigations, that's not something Republican leadership wanted to give him an opening for. But at the same time, Kevin McCarthy said, look, every single member of my Republican conference receives at least two committee assignments. That's exactly what Santos was seated on. The small business chairman told my colleague Scott Wong that a lot of Main Street businesses happen in New York, and so Santos deserves a place on these committee. All the while, these investigations are happening outside of Congress, and the ethics investigation into him, of course, are happening inside of Congress, which could take quite some time.
Julie, thanks so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.